No one expected it, not the doctors, not the parents, not even the silent walls of the nursery. But that night, as the newborn lay breathing softly in the crib, something unexplainable happened. A gray cat, gentle, watchful, almost angelic, pressed itself close to the baby's heart. And in that fragile silence, a golden glow appeared, a miracle no one could ever forget. Somewhere in the heart of Russia's Sadgorod Zoo, on a day when the air itself seemed heavy with mystery, the desperate cries of a small cat echoed like a song of survival through the winding cages and towering enclosures. The staff froze, startled by the intensity of the sound. It wasn't the ordinary mewing of a house cat. It was urgent, almost pleading, like a mother crying for her children, or a soul calling for salvation. Workers rushed through the zoo, weaving past tigers pacing in their cages, past the watchful eyes of bears and leopards, their flashlights cutting through the dim evening air as they searched for their 1-year-old miracle cat, Musha. She had been restless that morning, her small body, round with a swollen belly, moving slowly from one shadowed corner to another. Her steps were hesitant, her green eyes wide with some ancient knowledge of pain and change. Fear gripped the workers' hearts. They had rescued her once before, from death itself. And now it seemed they were being called to save her again. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. And in that moment, Musha's cries weren't just the cries of a cat. They were the cries of creation itself. A living reminder that life is fragile, beautiful, and worth fighting for. By the time they found her, hidden away in the thick underbrush, they saw something that would forever alter their understanding of the bond between humans and animals. For Musha was not alone. She had chosen companions so unexpected, so miraculous that the zoo staff stood frozen in disbelief, tears forming in their eyes, their hearts pounding like drums of fate. But Musha's story didn't begin with this moment of shock. To understand her miracle, you must go back to a freezing winter morning when the earth itself seemed to reject life. The Sadgorod Zoo was waking up under a blanket of frost, the animals stirring in their enclosures, their breath rising in silver clouds against the icy air. That's when one of the keepers spotted it. A small pile of snow and dirt twitching ever so slightly near the gate. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then she leaned closer and saw it. A tiny kitten, half buried in frost, her frail chest barely rising, her body frozen stiff. An icicle clung stubbornly to her pink nose like a cruel ornament of winter. The keeper gasped, her own breath catching in the cold as she scooped the kitten into her gloved hands. Musha was so small she fit inside a single palm. Her eyes fluttered weakly, as if she was on the threshold between worlds. "Not today," the keeper whispered, shoving the trembling furball into her coat against her heart and running into the zoo. Inside the warmth of the vet's office, the doctors worked furiously, rubbing her chest, giving her drops of warm milk, wrapping her in blankets heated over radiators. But their eyes told a darker story. They didn't know if she would live another hour, and so they waited and hoped and prayed. Then something happened, the tiniest miracle. Musha stirred, her weak mew piercing the silence. Then another breath, and another. She survived the night. Then the next, and the next. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Musha had stepped out of death's shadow and into life. From that moment on, she wasn't just a cat. She was a promise. A living reminder that miracles are real, that survival is possible, that love can defeat the coldest winters. As Musha grew, so did her bond with the humans who had saved her. Between work shifts, keepers would rush into the break room just to hold her tiny body, to feel the warmth of her fur against their tired hands. She became family, a soft heartbeat in a world surrounded by cages and wild roars. But Musha wasn't meant to stay behind glass forever. She began staring at the windows with longing, her eyes following the snowflakes, the birds, the world beyond. They feared for her. The zoo wasn't a safe place for a fragile cat. Tigers prowled behind steel. Lions growled deep in their throats. Crocodiles slipped silently through green waters. But fate doesn't wait for permission. One day, a careless hand left the door open. Musha slipped through it like a shadow, vanishing into the dangerous wildness of the zoo. Panic erupted. For 2 days, workers searched every enclosure, their voices hoarse from calling her name. Each step past the crocodile pit made their hearts stop. What if she had wandered too close? What if we're too late? Whispered one keeper. Her tears barely held back, but hope never died. And then, as if heaven itself had heard their prayers, Musha appeared, calmly scratching at the break room door, her green eyes glowing with pride and mystery. She had survived the impossible once more. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. That night, the keeper who found her wept into Musha's fur, realizing she could never say goodbye. Musha wasn't just a rescued cat anymore. She was their guardian of hope, their living miracle. Weeks later, something began to change again. Musha, once playful and full of energy, now lay tired and grumpy. She no longer darted under tablecloths to swipe playfully at passing feet. Instead, she dragged herself into the sunlight only to collapse with heavy breaths. The keepers grew worried, but before they could solve the mystery, Musha vanished. At first, no one panicked. She had disappeared before and returned. But this time, rain fell harder than it had in months. Thunder cracked open the sky. The animals grew restless, uneasy. Something was coming. With flashlights in hand, the keepers scoured the zoo, their hearts beating louder than the storm. And then, a sound, a weak, desperate cry. Not far from the lion enclosure, deep inside a thorny bush, they found her, Musha, weary, stubborn, but not alone. Against her chest, tiny bodies squirmed and wiggled. At first glance, they thought kittens, but as the keepers crawled closer, their eyes widened in disbelief. Among the newborn kittens nestled strange little creatures, their tiny bodies covered in quills. Baby hedgehogs, the keepers gasped, their hands trembling as they reached forward. What miracle had they stumbled upon? Carefully, they lifted Musha and her impossible family, kittens and hedgehogs alike, and carried them into the break room, wrapping them in blankets, whispering words of awe and wonder. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. And in that room, with the storm raging outside, creation's promise unfolded. Predator and prey, fragile and fierce, side by side under the loving gaze of one small cat who refused to let them be divided. When the zoo's veterinarian saw them, he froze. At first, he laughed, assuming the keepers were playing a trick. But when he leaned over the box and saw kittens and hedgehogs pressed together under Musha's warm fur, his smile disappeared. In all my years, I've never seen anything like this, he whispered, his voice shaking. He suggested separating them. Nature, after all, wasn't supposed to work this way. But Musha had other plans. As soon as the hedgehogs were moved, Musha grew restless, pacing, meowing with desperate urgency. Then, with deliberate care, she picked up each of her kittens and carried them across the room to where the hedgehogs were huddled. She lay down proudly, wrapping her small body around them all, her purr echoing like a lullaby of defiance. In her world, there were no boundaries, no enemies, no separation, only love. The keepers stood there, tears glistening in their eyes, watching a miracle unfold. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about unity, about breaking the rules of nature in the name of something greater. And as Musha purred, her unlikely children snuggling into her warmth, the storm outside began to quiet. The rain slowed, the clouds parted, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if heaven itself was smiling. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Musha had lived. She had survived. She had chosen love over division. And in doing so, she gave the world a story. A heartwarming animal video, a dramatic wildlife rescue, a viral YouTube story that wasn't just about a cat and her young, but about humanity itself. Because sometimes, the smallest creatures carry the greatest miracles. One keeper whispered in disbelief, her trembling voice cutting through the hushed silence of the room. The others leaned closer, their eyes wide, hearts pounding as they stared at the impossible sight unfolding before them. How could Musha, a small black rescue cat with soft, tender fur, possibly allow 8 tiny hedgehogs, bristling with razor-sharp quills, to press against her delicate belly, where her own newborn kittens lay. And yet there she was, utterly calm, golden eyes glowing with a peace that seemed to radiate from something far greater than instinct. The workers, the animal doctor, the entire staff stood frozen. They were not just watching an animal nursing young. They were witnessing a miracle, a living parable of love that defied nature itself. Musha had made her choice, and it was absolute. She would adopt them all, not 4, not 5, but 8 orphaned hedgehogs. She had declared herself their mother, their protector, their only chance to survive. The staff exchanged fearful glances, wondering whether the spikes might wound her fragile kittens. Their human logic screamed danger, but Musha's calmness silenced every doubt. She had already decided, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. The room filled with tears, awe, and trembling reverence, as if the divine had stepped softly into their midst in the form of one small cat who refused to let differences divide her family. The truth of the hedgehog's past was as heartbreaking as the miracle was beautiful. Their real mother, terrified and unprotected, had been brutally killed in a tragic lawnmower accident on the zoo grounds just days earlier. The sound of the machine had silenced her forever, leaving behind 8 blind, trembling babies barely clinging to life. When staff discovered them, their tiny bodies were already dangerously cold. Rushing them inside, they placed them on heating pads, cradled them in blankets, and worked desperately to save them. For 2 endless nights, keepers tried everything: syringes filled with formula, bottles carefully prepared, feeding dishes of warm milk. But the starving infants refused. Their fragile mouths stayed sealed shut, their tiny bellies sinking in. Each passing hour was another step closer to death. The workers grew exhausted, hearts breaking as they watched life slip away from creatures so helpless. Their eyes grew hollow with despair. Some whispered prayers, some simply wept. After countless failed attempts, there was only one option left. Shaking with uncertainty, they placed the dying hedgehogs back with Musha, their unlikely mother. Something about her was different. Just weeks before, Musha had fostered abandoned kittens. Her body was still full of milk, her heart full of burning maternal fire. And when the tiny hedgehogs whimpered in their last cries of hunger, Musha's instincts awakened with a force as old as creation. She lay still, her warm body radiating heat, her scent of life-giving milk filling the air. The hedgehog sniffed, trembled, and then, in one magical instant, burrowed into her black fur with desperate strength. Time froze. Death stopped its march. The babies latched onto Musha's belly, their cries melting into the sound of frantic suckling. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. In that moment, 8 fragile lives were pulled back from the edge of darkness into light. Not by science, but by love. The miracle spread quickly through whispers and awe. But Musha's story wasn't the first of its kind. Years before, in 2012, another Russian cat named Sonia had adopted 4 orphaned hedgehogs in a moment equally astonishing. And in another zoo, a cat named Rosinka became a global legend after adopting an abandoned baby squirrel monkey rejected by his biological mother. These stories revealed something profound, something beyond explanation. A mysterious, almost divine capacity in animals to cross the invisible lines of species, to become saviors when no one else could. Do animals understand a language of love that humans often forget? One keeper wondered aloud, her eyes brimming with tears. Cats, so often dismissed as selfish, aloof, or uncaring, seem to hold hidden depths. Science itself confirmed that living with cats reduces heart disease, helps people sleep, lowers stress, and fills homes with healing purrs that vibrate like medicine for weary souls. But what Musha did surpassed even science. She wasn't just lowering stress or giving comfort. She was performing an act of sacrifice, pouring her very body and spirit into raising children who didn't even belong to her species. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. In Musha's small fur-covered form, ancient scripture breathed to life. Love was no longer limited to kind or bloodline. It was borderless, limitless, a wildfire burning through every wall. And the world was beginning to watch. For a week that felt like eternity, Musha nursed the hedgehogs as if they had been born of her own body. Every moment was a gamble. Would her kittens be harmed by the sharp quills? Would the hedgehogs reject her milk? Would her small frame collapse under the strain of feeding so many? But Musha showed no fear. Not once did she flinch at the quills pressing against her. Not once did she cry out in pain. It was as if the hedgehogs themselves understood her sacrifice and instinctively softened their touch. Caretakers leaned in close to watch with tears streaming down their cheeks. "Look," one whispered, her voice breaking. "She's teaching them to be gentle." The zoo, once just a place of cages and routines, had become a sanctuary of living wonder. Visitors came quietly, reverently, standing at the glass to witness the impossible. A black cat, barely more than a rescued stray herself, feeding 8 spiny orphans like they were her own. The keepers built a nursery beside their office to watch day and night, never leaving Musha alone in case tragedy struck. But tragedy never came. Slowly, the hedgehogs grew stronger. They began nibbling insects, testing tiny teeth, growing into their wild nature. Musha watched proudly, still guarding them as fiercely as the day she first claimed them. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Musha had become not just their mother, but a living testament that love, once chosen, never lets go. By the summer of 2017, Musha's miracle had leapt beyond the zoo walls and onto the global stage. Pictures and videos of her nursing hedgehogs alongside her kittens went viral, spreading across continents, reaching millions. People laughed, cried, and marveled. Cat lovers called her a hero. Even lifelong dog fans confessed to being deeply moved. Soon, visitors began arriving from all over the world, not to see tigers or lions, but to sit quietly with Musha and her unusual family. The zoo made a bold decision. They opened her enclosure to allow people to sit inside and experience the miracle firsthand. Visitors reported the same astonishing thing. When Musha looked into their eyes, it was as though she whispered a secret. Love has no barriers, no species, no limits. The once frozen kitten who had nearly died in a snowdrift had become a mother of legends, a symbol of unity the world desperately needed. Years passed. Musha became a television star, her story told across nations. The 8 hedgehogs grew into adults, strong and wild, but never once forgotten by their adoptive mother. Even today, Musha visits them, curling at their side, checking on them with unwavering tenderness. She has never left them, not once, not even for a day. The zookeepers proudly tell visitors, 7 years later, Musha is remembered not just as a cat, but as Musha, the mother of hedgehogs, a beacon of compassion that crossed the boundaries of creation. And though science may search for reasons, the story ends not with answers, but with wonder. For in that small nursery in Vladivostok, Musha taught the world a truth that no textbook could hold. Sometimes the heart understands what the mind cannot. And now these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. As dawn's first light touched the nursery window, the truth could no longer be denied. This was not just a night of survival. It was a night of divine intervention. A baby, once fragile and weak, now breathed with the rhythm of life, wrapped in the warmth of a guardian no one expected. A gray cat whose silent devotion became the shield between death and life. Tears streamed down the parents' faces as they realized the impossible. Sometimes, miracles wear fur and speak only through love. And as the child's tiny hand curled into the cat's soft fur, the world was reminded of an eternal truth. Every good and perfect gift is from above. This was more than a story. It was proof that love, in its purest form, can cross every boundary, even between human and animal, and leave the world forever changed.